My name is London Rain. Thank you for joining me in my studio. Today we'll talk about my latest sample, which got over 3.5 million views across all platforms, which is really amazing. I truly appreciate everyone that reached out, liked, shared, left a comment, supported me on Patreon. You really actually changed my life these past couple of weeks. Due to popular requests, this and the 14 other samples from my sample making series are up now on all streaming services and exclusively downloadable on Waves. So if you want to support me, all the links are down below. I asked you on IG what you're interested in regarding this sample, so I'll try my best to touch on all of that in this video, from special techniques and processing to arrangement and even the visuals. So let's get into it. I started the intro with this piano called the Lounge Piano, which is free on Piano Book. The link is below. Shout out Ishido for putting me on. It originally sounded like this. I printed that and recorded my speakers to capture the natural room reverb of my space. This helps to widen the signal and make it sound more realistic. Definitely check out the video that I did on Loner's channel for more on that technique. The first plugin that I put on the sum of that is the Galaxy Tape Echo by Universal. I don't know if you ever noticed this, but when changing the echo rate on analog echoes or on some plugins while the echo is actually playing, you get this really cool pitch effect off the actual echoes. I used that to my advantage and automated the rate to in or decrease on every other note, which sounds like this. Every time the echo automation occurs, I'm also automating the mix of Arturia's tube distortion. I'm also automating the mix of Arturia's spring reverb at the beginning of every 4-bar section and using Fairchild compression to control the entire sound. After printing all of those effects, I put a pan automation on the sum, again automating the mix to swell up to the end of every bar. I really fell in love with just printing effects. It basically means you're committing to those settings and sometimes forces you to think differently because you can't just go back and change the settings of the plugin. Also saving CPU power at the same time, so win-win. Right before the drop, there are 2 risers and a super short break to increase the impact of the following part by contrasting it with absolute silence. The first thing that I added were 2 chord hits from the Micro Freak, which I treated with a low cut, mellow fi, and a plate reverb. After that is a random ARP from the Micro Freak as well, containing notes from the G minor scale, which is the key of the intro, slowly increasing in volume. I used 3 different basses in that big intro section. The first one being a very short impact from my Moog, followed by an electric bass which is fading out while I have a slowed and pitched violin fading in. I also added a kick to make the one hit harder. To fill out the rest of the space and make the section a little more trippy, I ran the main piano through multiple presets of Arturia's fragments as well as Cardinal by Distro, printing the result every time and taking little pieces of everything to create something that sounds like this. Everything that I just showed you is based on the original idea that this whole sample started with. I'm modulating from G minor in the intro to A minor in the main section for no reason, I just did it. Also, after the intro, I'm presenting this main idea just by itself for a couple of reasons. It's meant to be the main theme, the main hook of the sample. So I'm allowing the listener to direct all of their attention towards this motif by playing it solo without any other sounds or potential distractions. Also, contrast is one of the most powerful tools in music production, so having having that very wide intro going to that very narrow piano definitely creates a moment of surprise. To move forward with the sample and to evolve what's just been introduced, I use a technique that I talk about all the time when people ask me how to come up with new parts for their compositions. I basically take what I already have and play that with a different instrument, whether it's real or virtual, which sparks new ideas almost every time. In this case, I used a preset from my Micro Freak virtual instrument, which sounds like this. Again, I love the fact that it's going from this massive intro to this narrow piano to this even closer, more focused sound. To make that even more interesting and connected to the piano from before, I layered the Micro Freak sound with the piano sound, but in a way that the piano acts more like a texture layer. Before the next section, I made this weird sound and recorded myself breathing, which is getting its main character from Arturia's Fragments plugin. To transition into the next part, I did two things. The first one I got a lot of questions about, which is what I did with my mixer here. So this is the Yamaha EMX 150 and it has a built-in analog echo that I use for this transition. I basically started an ARP on the Micro Freak, which is just playing the whole time and going to channel 4. I'm turning up the master, of course, the echo send and return. Then I move the fader up slowly, accelerating at the end and then going down really fast. The fact that the echo's volume is linked to the main output faders of the mixer makes it fade out the way it naturally does, which creates this really cool transition. To make it even better, I used that exact technique on two different sounds and layered them together. The second technique I use to transition between the two parts is to bring in the flute a little early to build a bridge between the two normally separated sections. The flute sound is made up of two layers, one super dry one and one with a glitchy reverb that I patched with the Cardinal Effects plugin. We're also back to the main piano in that section with some reverbs coming in at the end to transition to the orchestral part of the sample. And all of that is layered with a bass from a Moog, which has a tremolo on it to create rhythm and a kick on a 1 to create a little more impact. We've now arrived at the more orchestral switch up part of the composition. It has a lot of layers, so I'll just go instrument by instrument, starting with the piano, which is the same one that I used throughout this whole sample. Just like the flute, it has a little introduction before the start of the actual part. For the piano, this intro just consists of 2 notes, but it makes the transition so much smoother and less abrupt in my opinion. I use the same speaker recording technique as before to achieve the actual sound. The chords that I'm playing here are D minor 7, which I'm touching on later again, A flat major 7, which I don't think counts as a modulation, but is more like a borrowed chord. But I'm not completely sure, as this chord was chosen unintentionally. I just felt like that's where the harmony needed to go. Next is an F major 7 and a B flat minor 7, which I chose intentionally this time because I needed to get back to the tonic, which is A minor, and choosing a chord that's a half step above or below your destination usually creates a nice tension, which resolves pretty well most of the time. Before the bass and the choir come in later in that section, I use a gain automation to pull back the piano just a little bit, which enhances the contrast and makes everything that comes afterwards feel more euphoric and uplifting. Next is that mixer echo transition I showed you earlier. Starting off exactly like before, but as soon as it hits the point of transition, I have timed it to literally slow down the sample and prepare the listener for that new mood. Another instrument which really helps with transitioning is the kalimba, which consists of 2 layers. The first one is running through the quadriverb and the echo of my mixer, I believe, and the second one is using the same glitch echo preset from the flute before. Next up is my solo vocal, which is doing the exact same main melody, but this time over a D minor 7 instead of an A minor 7, which is called reharmonizing. The reason this works so well is because A and D are next to each other on the circle of fifths, which means their scales are sharing a lot of common tones, so it's usually a very good place to start when trying to reharmonize a melody. The processing is pretty basic with an EQ, compressor, and reverb. The only interesting thing is that I'm doing the exact same gain pull here as I did with the piano. To enhance that pull and release effect even further, I also automated the mix and decay of the reverb to wash out at the end of the vocal. I played in some flute for that part as well, which acts as a transitional element at first, a harmony to the solo vocal after, and a background ambience after that. I automated the mix of the flute's reverb to enhance that pull and release effect again and to make it into an ambience like I just talked about. I also have some kicks at the beginning of this section, which came from the Moog bass from earlier accidentally, but I love just printing mistakes and leaving them in. Next, I played in two guitars, the first one acting as a melody layer for the solo vocal and the flute ensemble later on. The second one is playing some chords to harmonize what the piano is doing. To transition into the next 4 bars, I played in a triangle. I also sang in a choir, which is mainly doing the chorus of the piano. I got a lot of questions about how I do my choirs, and I actually already did a video specifically on that topic a while ago. The link is below. The interesting thing about it here is the top layer, which is basically developing the main motif of the song. The way you develop a motif is by keeping some of its core elements the same, like rhythm or direction of movement in between notes, while changing others like the actual notes that are used. This helps keep the main melody in the listener's head while creating a whole new feel with it. With the choir, I'm bringing in a live bass as well as some random background ad-libs. I'm starting the next 4 bars with some strings which are from both the BBC Symphony Orchestra and the Session Strings Pro and have been run through my speakers. The basses, cellos and violas are basically following the main chords. For the violins, I composed a counter melody to fill up some space. Next, I used a bunch of different winds from the BBC Symphony Orchestra, played in yet another variation of the main melody, ran all of that through tape and recorded my speakers again. I felt like bringing in those strings and winds created a really beautiful moment, so I used a bird texture that I recorded on my phone and layered it underneath to enhance that surreal, otherworldly feeling. I'm not introducing any new instruments for the last 4 bars of that orchestral section. They're all kind of just building and building to transition back to where the sample started. Before moving on, let's listen to that whole section in context again so you can hear how all of the separate elements I just showed you are working together. Of course, now we're back where we came from with that main piano. I used 2 reverb tails again to transition into something like a drop. That drop consists of the main piano with a glitch delay layer and an 808 that I played in with the Moog. To finish it all off, I layered that main piano with an offbeat lower one which has an automated distortion on it and another Moog bass underneath. Before moving on to the visuals, I want to talk about arrangement real quick because I got a lot of questions about that as well. Sadly, I can't give you a specific answer, but more of an idea of my general approach. I'm calling these type of samples, like the one I just broke down, entertainment samples. They're more like songs and can be listened to by themselves and aren't made with the intention to necessarily be flipped or used in any way. So for those type of compositions, I always try to tell a story and take the listener on a journey. And of course, that journey can be just walking on a straight flat road for miles and miles, or it could have twists and turns, different locations, dangerous climbs to arrive at a beautiful scene. I choose my instruments, what they're playing and when they're playing according to feeling. I consider frequencies of instruments, their volumes, their panning, the amount of processing on them, etc. to really put the listener in a 3-dimensional space. I try to create as many moments of contrast and tension as I can to keep the ears hooked, but at the same time reuse single elements like melodies or instruments with slight variations so the listener has something to hold on to. Besides the music, I also got a lot of questions about the visual aspect of my videos. So I'm going to show you my gear, which is all linked below, and how I achieved this vintage washed out look in Premiere Pro. The camera that I'm using is the Sony Alpha 7 Mark III with a Zeiss 55mm 1.8 lens and a Tiffin black Pro Mist filter. And yes, I do film myself. What really helps me is the DJI Raveneye, which I connect to my camera to enable me to see what the camera is seeing on my phone. I usually work with one single light, which is the Pixel G1S RGB video light. To create this scene, I use some no-name sunset lamp from Amazon. Let's go into Premiere Pro and I'll show you my general color grading process. After dragging in the footage, the first thing I always do is put on this film emulation preset to kind of give me a starting point. After that, doing some basic adjustments, and there's no general rule I go by here. Most of the tweaks are fitted to the exact scene that I'm working with because all of them are different. One thing I always do though is bump up the saturation and go with a colder bluish color with a slight green tint. After the general grading is done, I duplicate the layer, switch the blend mode of the upper one to screen, drag on a Gaussian blur, take the blur amount to about 250 and put a luma key on top of that. To finish it off, I drag a 35mm film grain on top, turn the blend mode to hard light and the opacity to about 60, and that's basically it. Again, I put chrysalide and 14 other samples on an album called Earth that you can download exclusively on Waves or listen to on all streaming services. As always, I really appreciate you taking your time watching this, and I'll see you soon. Love.